whether you're a human or a machine, you battle to follow the law. Hi there, my name's Garth Watson. I'm one of the co-founders of Libryo.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us today. And I suppose to kick us off,
James.
why did you start this business? How did you see there was a need for this?
That's a good question. So there's there's two ways to answer this question. One is with the benefit of hindsight, and the other one is what we were actually thinking when we did found the company. So I'll give you both. So the way we think about Libryo is that we service global companies. If you're a global company, knowing what the law requires of you at each of your different operations it's a bit of an impossibility actually, because the law is different everywhere. It's written in complicated sentences and phrases. It's changing all the time, and so to keep abreast of that and to know just simply what does the law require of me here and now, it's either done not at all or inaccurately, or it's actually prohibitively expensive to do it properly. And so we created Libryo to, I guess, reorganize the world's regulatory mess. Regulation is just terribly organized from a readability perspective, but also from a data perspective. It's all kinds of different file formats and data, data file types and that kind of thing. So if whether you're a human or a machine, you battle to follow the law globally. And yeah, so that's the way we think about Libryo. I mean, we actually had our origins in a consultancy, the environmental law consultancy, which was founded in 1991, which my co-founders and I, as well as the partners of Gunston's attorneys or Gunston Strandvik now in Cape Town, actually acquired in 2011. And we cut a very long story short, but when I moved over here in 2015, we realized that there was an opportunity, that the software that we had created was novel, and that I guess we were kind of shocked to discover that we were doing something novel that was needed but wasn't being done. So we thought, let's incorporate, let's get a startup going, let's get it let's access funding in London, which we did, and let's give it a go. So that's how we kind of started out. So kind of retrospectively, there's this great need that the world has that we've got the solution for, but actually how it was just taking opportunities afforded us one step at a time.
Makes a lot of sense. And how has the business changed? I guess from, as you say, you had this startup in the very early days to today. How's the business evolved in that time?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are about a team of around about 5 back then. We were completely remote. I was the only one in the UK. The rest of the team were in Cape Town. And now we are, and we're servicing mainly customers in South Africa. So mines, manufacturers, anyone who really has significant environmental, health and safety impacts. So a lot of global brands, but just the operations in South Africa. And now we are a team of about 40. We've gone through several funding rounds. We have customers all over the world, really, including pretty exotic locations like the Ukraine, Malaysia, India, China, the United States, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Argentina, the UK. And so, yeah, and not to mention most of the countries in Africa too, Australia. And yeah, so our coverage has grown drastically, and yeah, a distributed team, North America, Europe, Africa, yeah, I don't think, yeah, Malaysia actually, So always, and growing pretty quickly at the moment. Lot of our developers are in Kenya actually, which is.
So on the face of it, then the business has changed massively in that time. But practically for you as one of the co-founders, how has your role changed with that?
It's a good question actually. So I guess, yeah, I haven't pondered that for a while. I mean, I think you ponder it from year to year, but looking back to, I guess, 2016, I mean, maybe just going into one of the details is I currently am co-founder with responsibility for marketing. So I remember the day when we were part of Seed Camp, and they were our first institutional money in, along with Nextdoor Ventures. And part of what you have access to is a whole lot of discounts from like AWS through to HubSpot. And so we got HubSpot on a 90% discount. And HubSpot, as you might know, is a content marketing platform. So it's actually a complete customer stack, but mainly content marketing as a focus. And the question is, how do you launch a content marketing platform if you have no content? And so if you look on the Libryo blog today, you'll see the first number of blogs and blog series were written by me, and I haven't written a blog for I don't know how long. I think I put a bit of passion into one on sustainability governance last year, but that's it. So not blogging anymore. But yeah, so and then at a broad, at a high level, I guess you could say, involved in fewer and fewer operational things, increasingly fewer tactical things, and mainly working on completely strategic things, foundational things. So wherever there's a design that's needed to be written down and then to be translated into something that's built, that's how I see my role. It's the work of a founder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What we see a lot of is people like yourself that have a real legal background come in, they start their business, and as it scales, they get taken away from that hands-on part of the business, with no real training of how to do the actual running of the business. So how have you found that in terms of gaining those expertise and making sure that you're doing everything right?
It's another good question, actually. It's the E-Myth. I don't know if you've read that book, which means if you're a great lawyer, doesn't mean you're going to be able to run a great law business. If you're a good plumber, doesn't mean you're going to be good at running a plumbing business. Whatever, maybe a bad example there, but I was quite fortunate at Gunston's Attorneys, as it then was, that Grant Gunston, who's the founding partner there, gave me a lot of business opportunities. So invited me to the board meeting before I finished articles, which is what South Africans call a trainee contract. And so got insight into running a business kind of from the outset. And so the thing about being a lawyer is law is always changing. So if you're practicing law, you're constantly learning. And so that skill of constantly learning translates pretty well into entrepreneurship, actually, because you just have got to be constantly learning. So whether it's through podcasts, I remember we took Harry Stebbings launched his 20-minute VC and started co-hosting the SaaStr podcast at around the same time as we were initially founding Libryo in the UK. And yeah, we took a real deep dive with Harry, and we still yet to have that mojito. So Harry, if you ever see this, that offer is still there. It's still by Zoom. Yeah, so yeah, just reading blogs. There's the thing about startups is that you're going from 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel would put it. You're creating something completely novel, and so there isn't really a precedent for it. So if it is precedented, it's probably irrelevant for you. So there's an element of which, not an element, there's a sense in which you have to find stuff that's kind of on the cutting edge. So podcasts by fellow founders and VCs, and blogs are probably your best source. And we're constant learners in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned how legislation and law generally is constantly changing, no matter what country you're in. So how have you found that? You mentioned all the different countries that you've expanded to. So how do you make sure that you are at the cutting edge of what the new legislations are and that you're given the right advice? And how do you make sure you're not caught out by that?
Cool. So just before we kick that question off, or kick the answer off rather, we're not giving legal advice. So we're an advanced legal information service, and lawyers may provide legal services on the back of it, but we're not providing legal advice, and that's really important from a practicing law without a license kind of perspective. But we have created processes and technology which effectively we direct at the sources of law. So these are the websites where law is published by legislatures or administrative bodies, and we then convert that into a form of data, which we've created. It's a type of HTML, and then we monitor those sources so that our database is always up to date. And if the law does change, then we notify customers. So it's a automated technology-based approach to making sure that customers receive relevant law. And part of it is helping customers to not have to drink from a fire hydrant. So there's so much law that there's actually two problems here: the problem of too much law and the problem of not having access to the law, or not being able to find, not having the law or access to it. And they're both bad, because the one is like you don't have the law, so you don't know how to comply with it, and the other ones you have it, but you can't find the relevant section or the relevant obligation, so you fail to comply. And so what we do is we create Libryo streams, which are context-specific feeds of relevant regulation, and customers are updated on a Libryo stream by Libryo stream basis, so that they know when the law changes and they can access it and find the relevant bit easily.
Makes a lot of sense. And with the international basis of your business, you maybe more than others will be used to managing teams remotely. Obviously something a lot of businesses have now been forced into with lockdowns and COVID and everything else. So I suppose what is some advice for businesses that are newer to managing these teams remotely?
It's a great question. We actually, when the pandemic hit or when lockdown started in March 2020, we actually released a blog. Pete, my fellow co-founder, wrote it, called "Work in a Time of Coronavirus." And you can find that on the Libryo blog. And because we've been, like you say, we've been a remote team for a couple of years, and there are a lot of learnings that we've had, and also it's a completely different paradigm. So just because you have the technology infrastructure to be able to meet with someone remotely doesn't mean that you can run a remote operation, or at least run it well. And we have a set of foundational principles which are core to our business. We set them out as principles or values that were descriptive and not prescriptive, but we wanted to stay true to them. And one of them is that we are adults, which sounds a little bit strange, but the thing is, it's not daycare for adults. Work is not daycare for adults. And I think a lot of companies, there was quite a shock to the system when managers didn't know whether their employees were working or not. And that was a problem to them. But it's actually not a problem if you have a management system which is designed for remote work, which is actually works well in person well, which is management by objectives. So what are the company's goals? How does that translate into team goals? How does that translate into individual goals, period by period? And so what you like, it's what we need to do is do X. Question is did you do X? Like, doesn't matter if it took you 5 hours or 8 hours. So that certainly is at the front of it. But I mean, really, it all boils down to kind of, I guess, trust, um, and a sense of cooperation, which yeah, I think we're doing all right. It is a challenge, especially recruiting, bringing people into the team remotely. You haven't ever met them, so even without the ability to gather together, which we would do periodically, get the whole company together in one city, usually Cape Town. It is a challenge, but yes, I think so far so good, and yeah, so far so good, I think.
And what are your top tips for that second piece then? So for the onboarding, and this is something that the Founder Network is actually going through at the moment, where we brought new team members on, haven't ever met them, and it's really a case of making sure that they become fully aligned with what we're looking to achieve and our values and so on. So what's your advice there?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. What we do is we have an orientation kind of document that's got everything that you need to know about Libryo, and what that involves largely is, obviously there's stuff to read, but then it's who to meet, and what we've realized is that you can form really great working relationships, but also friendships online. And so a large part of that is making sure that you know the right people at Libryo, and have had a chance to meaningfully connect with them. And this is something that we're constantly working on and improving. So if you're new to Libryo, please let me know how we're doing on the score. And yeah, so it's a work in progress. I don't have any hot tips to be perfectly frank. We're just trying our best on that score.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've grown, you've mentioned a couple of times that you've been through various rounds of funding as well.
Yeah.
So that is obviously a hot topic for most scaling SMEs. So just looking back at those various rounds, one, how have they differed? And two, is there anything you would have done differently, or anything you're really glad you actually did to get it across the line?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. So 2016, we raised the pre-seed round from Seed Camp and Nextlaw Ventures. That was a legal. They did a legal tech fallout. Can't remember how many companies applied, but it was a lot. And we were selected along with Clause, who's a smart contracts company. And so we're just grateful to get our first funding in, because what that really meant was that we could actually officially, I guess, start the company. The founders and the initial team could be paid, and we could kind of get going. Before that, we were trying to raise a seed round, so we were trying to raise £1 million before that, and I think we've always been a little too ambitious. We've always thought we could raise more at a higher valuation than what was reasonable. That first check came in as a convertible note, so we didn't have to put a valuation on the company at that stage. And we did then in 2017 raise a seed round. So within, I don't know, just over a year, we closed the seed round. That was a good round, and I don't think we would have done anything differently there. Then in 2019, we tried to raise a Series A. And I think at that stage I think if we had done anything differently, it would have been to pull the plug on the fundraise a little bit sooner. I think we got signals from the market that we weren't quite ready for a growth round, and in retrospect, we definitely weren't. We still needed to do quite a lot of foundation laying, and so I think we probably spent too much time trying to raise that round, and then realized that what we really needed to do was to raise the round that we did raise, which was a seed extension round, which was just at a slightly higher valuation to the seed round, And the framing was, this isn't growth capital. This is capital that we need to complete our hypergrowth foundations. I prefer to actually think of seed rounds as foundation rounds. So what foundations are you laying for a massive skyscraper? The higher the building, the deeper the foundations need to be. And yeah, and then during COVID, again, we were going to go out for a Series A, and we were on track. And I think the pandemic, just the uncertainty introduced by the pandemic, meant that and what we eventually decided to do was to not raise, and we made that decision very quickly. And I think we played it perfectly, actually, in retrospect. So we've raised just enough capital to withstand the uncertainty, which I think we're doing now. And yeah, we'll undoubtedly raise a growth round, pretty soon. But I don't think we're in a position where we don't need to raise at the moment, which is great.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really a case of making sure you're ready for that next round, and really paying attention to, as you say, market conditions, people's response to it, and so on, and effectively not being afraid of pulling away from it if it's not right at that time, which is really good to hear. And just while going through,
just on that, I mean, fundraising is costly. So going out, spending time in meetings with VCs is a complete distraction. It's a necessary evil in a sense. So yeah, if you don't need to spend a lot of time in those meetings, then, or you shouldn't be, then yeah, it's wise to.
And talk to me a bit about that distraction. So obviously it takes your attention as one of the founders away from the business, away from the day-to-day. So how do you make sure that all stays on track and everything's still ticking over while you are looking at these funding options?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually am not involved in certainly the early stages of fundraising. Well, not involved in it. Obviously, I'll get involved once we have a term sheet, and obviously want to meet the investors and that kind of thing. And that usually they want to meet the other founders at that stage of the game. But Pete and Mark, my two co-founders, run with the fundraising. Part of it is because there needs to be, we need to mitigate the risk of distraction. We've got a really, really great team of leaders at Libryo, and they increase, I talked about earlier the progression from being operational through to strategic, and increasingly they are bearing most of the tactical and operational weight. So we can go away for a little while and the business will run well. So yeah, but in the early stages, yeah, it's like a zero-sum game between, do we spend time trying to close customer deals or close fundraising deals?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And just to finish off then, so where can people go to find out more about both yourself and Libryo?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, Garth Watson. At Garth Watson. Libryo is libryo.com. I think we're on most of the social platforms, the relevant ones. And yeah, blog.libryo as well for our blog content.